Well, welcome back, everyone. Today I'm honored to be joined by Mr. Tim Van Dyken. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, quick introduction on you. You were homeschooled one of 10 children.
Yes.
That's pretty wild.
5 boys, 5 girls.
Yeah, your dad was a pastor.
Yep.
Then you spent 6 years in the military Coast Guard. Did 8 years as a police officer. You've done 13 years in business finance.
Yep.
And you are a big hunter. You have your own show, Field to Flame, and a husband and father, all sorts of fun things.
Yes. That's about right.
Yeah. So we'll
Yeah.
jump right in with your military career. You were in the Coast Guard.
Yep.
How'd that come about?
Yeah, so I was a homeschool kid. And when I was 18, a friend of mine said, "Hey, what are you going to do when you're done with school?" And I should have thought about it by then. I was thinking of going to college to be a vet. He said, "Well, I'm going to be a police officer and I'm going to go to the Coast Guard, and that's going to give me my training to be a police officer." And I thought, that sounds like fun. I'm going to do it too. And he said, "You'll never be a cop." I'm like, okay, well, I'll take that challenge, since we made $100 bet, and I joined the Coast Guard with him. And yeah,
That's fun.
yeah.
Yeah. And then where were you stationed in the Coast Guard?
So 2 different stations. After boot camp, I went down to California. My home base was the Bay Area, Alameda Island specifically,
Okay.
and I was attached to a large ship, and I was part of a law enforcement detachment from that large ship that we would travel up and down the West Coast.
Yeah. And can you just the mic a little closer to you? Yeah, that's great. So the Coast Guard is I've never fully understood it. So there's different units of the Coast Guard, and sometimes they're in smaller ships, sometimes in bigger boats. What are you guys actually out there doing?
Yeah, good question. So the Coast Guard's primary mission is search and rescue.
Okay.
Protect the U.S. borders is also a big part of our mission. Semper Paratus was always prepared, always ready was our motto, and it came about as part of the lighthouse service, which they would actually service lighthouses and do search and rescue from the coast for boats that were coming in and would get stranded on beaches. And then it morphed into a lot more search and rescue out in the high seas, as well as protecting our borders, or assisting Homeland Security, or assisting Department of Transportation in protecting our borders from drugs or illegal migrants, things of that nature.
Okay. And there's international water laws.
Yeah.
I've never talk me through how that works, how they decide what is our water, what is international water.
Yeah,
What are
good
the
question.
borders
So
there?
there's inland waters. There's anything from you can draw a straight line like a bay on the low tide of the beach is where, from the ocean is where the maritime laws start. So the lowest tide, and then you could draw a straight line across from one entrance to the bay to another entrance. That's considered inland waters. That's of course territorial. Okay. And then there's the first 12 nautical miles. So a nautical mile is different than a regular mile. Regular mile has 1,760 yards. A nautical mile has 2,000 yards. We make it simple.
Got
just
it.
2,000.
Yes.
So 12.
Nice of you.
Yeah. We try to keep things simple because we're in the
Yes.
military. So 12 nautical miles out is considered that country's waters. That's protected waters. And then from 12 miles to 200 miles is considered waters that's not owned by that country, but used by that country for purposes like fishing or exploration. Then anything beyond 200 miles is considered international waters or high seas. So anything in high seas is open. There's and even really at 12 nautical miles off, we can board boats from other countries, but we have to get permission from those countries to board that boat that's domiciled in China or Russia or Mexico. Same with our boats. Our boats cannot be boarded by another Coast Guard without our permission, even out in the high seas, unless there's something specific going on that we need to, like it's an emergent situation. And then within 12 miles, you cannot enter those waters without that country's permission.
Got it. Okay. And who enforces those laws?
Yeah, good question. Enforcement of those laws is really that particular country will enforce those rules.
Okay.
On high seas, there is a Geneva Convention understanding that we respect those borders and those boundaries.
Okay. And has like if someone were to try and, let's say China, where a U.S. ship was out near China's waters and they boarded them without permission in the wrong location, who's going to, like, does China receive disciplinary measures? What's the situation there?
Yeah, they could receive disciplinary measures. It would cause some pretty heated discussions between our Pentagon and their military generals. Yeah, there would be significant problems if that happened.
Yeah.
That would be almost taking over another country's boat without permission.
Right. So that's seen as almost an act of warfare.
It would definitely be a severe act of aggression. Yeah.
Okay. And then who decided that 12 nautical miles was, that's the line?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. It just someone decided at some point.
At some point, the international, and there's the National Oceanic Administration. That's more of an international, or it's ours, but there's also international groups associated with that, and they'll agree upon a certain number. There was a convention that was held, and I think it was back in early 1900s or late 1800s, that discussed a lot of that, and they've set some of those rules in place. I don't know exactly what the rules were on how they decided it, but yeah.
Yeah. And so you were out in California.
Yeah.
What was the situation there as far as like who's trying to smuggle drugs into the country through California, and how are they doing it?
Yeah, so being stationed in California, I didn't spend actually any time on California coast.
Really?
Yep. So I spent majority of my time in Central America, and probably like 80% of my time in Central America, maybe 85%. And the other 10, 15, 20% was up in Alaska, search and rescue, and keeping Russia across the international date line. That was the borders up there. So up in there, it was search and rescue, keeping Russia across the border for fishing enforcement. And then down south, it was coast of Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Panama, a lot of Panama, El Salvador. And we would patrol anywhere from 12 to 1,000 miles offshore, looking for drug boats, looking for migrant boats. The migrant boats majority came from Asia, from China, and the drugs primarily came out of South America. Colombia would distribute them. Panama, some of these other countries like Guatemala was a big hotbed for drugs coming in the ocean from South America, transported to Guatemala or two different places in Mexico, and then transported up either across to the Gulf of Mexico or up the border, the southern border by Texas.
That's interesting because I always assumed that the vast majority of illegal migration would be coming from South America. But you're saying there was a lot that came from Asia as well?
A lot, yes. We had a handful of times we would stop boats that would have 150 to 250 Chinese nationals on the boat, and they're being smuggled across in horrible conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as far as like the smuggling the drugs up, 12 to 1,000 nautical miles is a large range.
Yep.
How are you finding those people? And how are you identifying a drug boat from just a regular boat?
Yeah, good question. So there's multiple ways. Some of the primary ways is we would have C-130s, the big double prop airplanes would cruise up and down and do reconnaissance for us, and other Navy planes would do reconnaissance for us, would identify where boats are, would send that information to us, and then we would send another helicopter out getting a closer look at the boat, see what they're doing, and identify if they have fishing gear on board. Are they just cruising along somewhere? What kind of boat is it? What does it look like? Do you see anyone on board? And that's how we caught a lot of the migration was through, you have a helicopter fly over and you would see 100 people on the boat, and that's clearly not a fishing boat.
Right.
It would look like a fishing boat, but it clearly not. And with drugs, the same thing. We'd look for fishing gear. They're clearly not fishing. So then we would want to go get a closer look. So we would take my small boats off the large ship would be dispatched. We would go in. We would after we got permission from that domiciled country, unless they didn't claim country. So sometimes that happened too. We'd have a boat say, "Oh, we're part of this country," and that country would say, "No, We don't know that boat. We've never heard of it. And so then they wouldn't have a domiciled country, and then we would just board them anyways. And we would do safety inspections, make sure everyone on there is following at least international safety laws. And from that point, we would usually find what we're looking for.
Yeah. Did you ever have situations where someone would look like a fishing boat and would act like a fishing boat, and then, but they were actually, smuggling drugs in, and they were just playing the long game?
That would happen. We would find those. Those are harder to find because if they look like they're fishing, it can be more difficult to. And sometimes we would have countries say, no, we don't want you boarding our boat. They are truly fishing. We don't want you boarding them. And could they be running drugs? There's a possibility that could happen, and we're not going to be able to catch all of them. And then there's other times too, we would find these semi-submersible subs that they would create that would be able to hold maybe 1,000 or 1,500 pounds of cocaine, and those would you just see the top surface of the boat, maybe like the top 2 or 3 feet out of the water.
Wow. And are you identifying them by radar or just scanning and looking?
Radar, those ones more by radar, and then of course our planes and helicopters.
Does the Coast Guard have submarines as well?
No.
So it's
No
just
subs.
it's just boats.
Just surface.
Yeah. And
Surface
is it
and air.
different? Does the Coast Guard have different ways they go about gathering information from California, Alaska, Mexico, and then on the Atlantic side as well?
Different information from like.
Yeah. Are they going about catching these people differently? Like, are there different methods that people are trying to smuggle stuff in?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It depends on. For drugs, I would say they would try to bring the boats to the coast of California. That was fairly common. A lot of them would actually try to get it into Mexico. And if you got the drugs into Mexico, getting it up to the southern border, because for so many years, and I'm talking back when I was in there was 2000 or 97 to 03, the border was pretty wide open. There was not, we didn't have the wall that we have now. So a lot of that open border policy allowed for a lot of free movement of goods across the border, including cocaine. And the U.S. has the largest appetite in the world for drugs. And then, of course, with migration too, along with illegal migration comes a lot of child sex trafficking, which that was a huge thing from China. Boats would have 50, 60 underage kids between ages 9 and 15 on the boat that are going into the sex trade, and they're going to places like New York. That was a big one. They all want to see the Statue of Liberty. That was a big thing for them. They could say those words in English. That was about it. It was freedom country. They thought they were going there for freedom. Or San Francisco was huge for that. Some of these large hubs and going to the southern border was a quick way to get them into the U.S. And the U.S. has also, sadly, the largest appetite in the world for underage sex trafficking.
Yeah. So you are patrolling from 12 to 1,000 nautical miles off the coast of Mexico, roughly.
Mexico, the north end of South America, the south end of the U.S.
Yeah. Are you docking there?
We would dock in places like Puerto Vallarta, Mazatlan, Acapulco.
Okay.
Yeah, all those, and then essentially Panama, Guatemala, El Salvador.
But once you got inside 12 nautical miles, you weren't allowed to arrest anyone or.
We could. It really depend on how our captain had conversations with. Like if we were chasing somebody, for instance, that would happen. We would have conversations with the embassies. Our embassy. Our captain would call the embassy would call their embassy, and we would work out an agreement to board the boat. Panama was really helpful. Mexico was fairly helpful. Costa Rica was really helpful. And those countries would usually board with us.
Got it. Okay. So that would incentivize someone not to stay inside the 12 nautical mile range. Correct? Like if you were smuggling drugs, if I go past 12, generally the U.S. is going to catch me.
Yeah.
If I go inside 12, Mexico will?
I don't think they ever thought of that. I
Really?
don't think that was ever really an issue for them because they're just trying to find any way to get to the U.S. And they would use fast boats too, where that they would do is they would go about 50 to 80 miles offshore, because it was far enough offshore. They didn't think it'd be harder to find them, and they would use these small boats that would be maybe like 25-foot Boston whaler. They would have twin or triple 225s or 250 horsepower engines on the back, and they would every 100 150 miles they would have these boats stationed, small boat stationed, and all those small boats, all they would have is drums of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And they would run to one, fuel back up, run to the next, fuel back up. So we would find those stations and not do anything. We'd leave them there and just patrol around those areas.
As bait,
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let them bring the bad guys to them, and then we'd go find them.
Right. But it was just like, hey, can we outrun the Coast Guard?
And that's really what it was. It was outrunning, and it was also a numbers game. They know, okay, if we can run, we need to get 1,000 pounds of cocaine to the U.S. this month. How are we going to do that? Well, we need to run 5,000 pounds, knowing 4,000 could get caught, as long as we get that 1,000 pounds in. And that's how it was all a numbers game. So like our biggest bust was 10.5 tons of cocaine on one boat, and that really hurt them. So it was a huge amount. But if there's 10.5 tons that we're getting, how much is getting through?
At least a ton.
Or more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you caught 10.5 tons of cocaine. How'd that happen?
That was the same way. It was a boat that was supposedly fishing. So we went and boarded them. They said they were from Mexico. The Mexican embassy said, that's not our boat. We don't claim it. And they couldn't come up with another country that would claim them. So we boarded the boat. There was eight individuals on the boat. They had 5 or 6 fishing rods and no gear. And it was an 80-foot fishing boat.
Got it.
So we just checked all the fuel tanks, and one fuel tank had no fuel in it, and all the hatch going into the fuel tank had nice freshly greased bolts. So we pulled it off, dropped a camera down in there, and there's bales and bales and bales and bales of drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you've come across 10.5 tons of cocaine? What's the procedure at that point?
For that was to, obviously, all individuals were arrested. We transport everything back to the nearest port, which in that case was in Guatemala. We turn them over to depends on where they're from. These happen to be Colombian nationals, so we call the Colombian military. We turn them over to the Colombian government, and then the boat and the drugs get destroyed. And I don't know the process of how they destroy it, but they have a chemical process.
But the boat as well, interestingly.
They destroyed the boat. It was that particular boat they destroyed. I don't know if they do that every time. I know that one they did because it was a pretty rough shape. It was leaking water as it was sitting at the dock. So if the bilge pumps weren't running nonstop, that thing would sink.
So they're like, we'll just let it.
It was a big thing. Yeah, it needed to be turned into a scrap pile of steel and melted down and made something else out of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Put it in the forge.
Right. But did they ever try and find out where these people are, coming from so they can go back to the source and stop it there?
They would, yeah. And the U.S. would work with the Colombian military on that as well. I don't know all the details of how cooperative some of these other countries were. Some were more cooperative than others. So, for instance, in that particular drug bust, and that was back in like 98 or 99, they would go and spend some time talking to like my captain and the his executive officer, one right below him, would go and have some conversations with our U.S. embassy and their embassy as well, in terms of how far they would dig into where it's coming from. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't think we have necessarily the greatest relations with Colombian government because cocaine specifically is a huge source of revenue for Colombia, because that's a huge amount. There's a huge amount of drugs that come directly from them. They have huge coca plants in Colombia growing cocaine. So yeah, I don't know all the details of how much time they spent. I was younger then too, so that was not something I dealt with. I dealt with catching them, and that was a fun part. All the paperwork and doing all the other stuff was
boring, and
that was someone else's job.
Yeah. Did you ever was there ever a situation where you had to like bomb the boat because you just couldn't get in there?
we never did that. We had some small boats we would find that were not in great shape. We didn't want to tow them back. We were maybe 500 or 800 miles offshore, and then we would sink them.
Okay.
Yeah, take
Yeah.
all the fuel off, make sure it's clean, and
Right.
then just sink it. And we're usually in 10, 15,000 foot deep water, so
You're not finding that boat.
you're not going to find it back.
Yeah.
No. And if
Why?
all the oil's off, all the fuel's off, so it's not going to pose a problem to the wild the marine life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense. And then why was the US allowed to like patrol the waters outside Guatemala or Mexico or South
Anyone
America?
can, as long as you're patrolling offshore, so off 12 miles. As long as we're patrolling out in the towards high seas, then that was fine. Usually we patrolled, and I don't know all the detail, all the rules on that. It's been 25 years, but I don't know all the details. But I know that because we have international treaties with Mexico, they would support us. Costa Rica probably spent a decent amount of time. I would say Panama was the country that we spent the most amount of time working with. They really like to stop the drug boats, and they had some pretty cool boats. So we would actually work within the 12 nautical mile zone with the Panama government, the Panamanian Coast Guard, and they had 3 or 4 boats that would follow us around, and then we would work with them to find the drug boats, because that was like the initial where most drugs from Colombia, because Colombia borders Panama, they would come right off the coast there. So Panama worked really closely with the U.S. Coast Guard.
Yeah. Did anyone ever go outside 1,000 miles and just take the high seas and then try and shoot back in?
Yeah, probably, but by the time they got out there, we would know about them most of the time, and that's a long ways to go around. And we just picked 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
I mean, there was times we would be 1,200, 1,500 miles offshore, but maybe chasing someone or checking something out. But most of the time we would stay within that, just because it's such a long ways out and it's expensive to move a boat that far out.
Right. How long were your shifts? Like, how long would you be on the boat?
You go out 2 to 3 months at a time.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. And then as far as human trafficking, when you came across a boat that had 100 people who have been human trafficked, what do you do there?
Yeah, that's always the sad part. It was difficult because they would spend insane amounts of money to buy their way to the U.S., to buy their own freedom, and obviously we can't allow that to happen. So we'd bring them back to a port of entry somewhere, usually somewhere in Mexico, and then they would go into a holding area and be flown back to China and turned back over to the Chinese government. And what happens to them then? I'd hate to guess what happens to them.
Yeah, and the people who were trying to smuggle them through,
they would be arrested. So there was different gangs that organized gangs, cartels, Chinese cartels that would run these trafficking rings. And so the people that were in charge of those, they would get turned over also to the Chinese military, and they would be most likely put in jail. And I'm assuming for a significant amount of time.
Yeah, and
China doesn't look fondly on people leaving their country.
No, they do not. As far as when it came to minors who were being trafficked, what do you do there? Because, were you able to return them to their parents, or?
That's a great question. I don't know all the details of how they would get returned. I know they would be returned. The goal was always to reunite them with family. Sometimes there would be kids that just don't have any family, and they've been trafficked so many times, even within China. And so they would get turned over to the Chinese version of DSHS, social services.
Yeah. We've had a lot of illegal immigration in the past 3.75 years. How much of it has been, do you know, across water, and how much across land?
I wouldn't even be able to guess nowadays of what it is. I know back when I was in there was a significant amount going through land. Majority would go through land just because it's easier,
right?
With the border being fairly open, it's easier. It's terms of numbers, I would have a hard time guessing what it is. I would guess a vast majority is through land. I'd be surprised if the most was through water. I'd say the vast majority is through land. But you're also gonna. I've never patrolled the Gulf of Mexico, and I know some Coast Guard friends that did patrol that, and they had a huge issue with migration coming through the water there, because anytime once you're off Mexico, there was a lot of U.S. border that they could cross through. But I still would venture to guess the vast majority is through the southern border.
What does U.S. border policy have to do with Coast Guard and your guys' operations?
So the border policy and the Coast Guard. I mean, our goal is to protect the border, protect people first, rescue people first, protect the U.S. border, protect U.S. interests. So anytime there's a border issue, it directly affects what our job was, at least back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So our job directly, any sort of border law change would directly affect what our job would do too.
Okay. Yeah. And what border policies made it so that we are in the situation we are in now?
Okay, yeah, good question. Well, I would say that the border policies of not being, I mean, it's a tough one, because I understand that why individuals want to flee their country, and having dealt with people like coming from China, I understand why. But we have rules, just like they have rules coming into their country. Try getting into China illegally. Try getting into North Korea illegally. There's a reason why we have rules. We can't just have freedom just to come in whenever you want, because that's going to hurt the people that are already here. And yeah, the policies of open borders, or even not protecting our borders enough, I mean, that's a dangerous way to if you don't have enough, and I'm trying to think here how that would affect us. It can be pretty political too, I think. That's a tough road to go down. I'm for locking down the borders 100%. Personally, I think we should have not. I don't have a problem with immigration. My grandparents immigrated here. My mom did. My mom was not born in the U.S. She was born in Holland. I wasn't born in the U.S. So I get that. But my problem is when people think, oh, we just have to take care of everybody. Yes, but we can't take care of them if we can't even take care of ourselves. So stop this nonsense of having, like, the border wall is actually a good thing. You're gonna prevent trafficking, child trafficking. You're gonna prevent all these drugs from coming in, which are killing your kids in your schools. And I think people don't get that. And when I saw these kids being sex trafficked at 9, 10 years old, and I have little kids, and I know that if we stop this flood of people coming across the border illegally, which are bringing these kids in, which is a real sad thing. Yes, we need to take care of them. You got to have a policy. You got to have a strict policy that prevents that from happening. And if you have a lax border policy, you're going to allow those things to happen, and you're in a sense condoning or allowing a trafficking, maybe not condoning, but allowing a trafficking issue to happen. And that is what has affected our I mean, that affects our kids, it affects our schools, it affects our economy, it affects parents. I mean, it affects everybody.
Yeah. And surely if the trafficking, if the U.S. border was more secure, then trafficking would go down, given that the U.S. has the hungriest appetite for that, which means that there would generally be less kids being trafficked, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So where are these kids going?
Yeah, they're going to big cities where there's big sex rings and massive, like in San Francisco, New York, Boston. Any of these big cities are going to have more of an issue with, you can call them sweatshops, you can call them a lot of things, but areas where they're just being used for their for underage sex traffic.
Yeah.
It's pretty brutal.
It's terrible.
It's horrible.
And why? So why are people not like? Why is there no legislation? Surely we should have more legislation against this kind of thing. Surely that just makes sense.
Yeah, I think we can legislate ourselves to death as well.
That's very
And and
true.
I and I think and this is going to go back to obviously a lack of God in our country, and I think a lack of parents, specifically dads. I've gotten pushback on this from people in the past, but I think I can go through majority of problems in our country and say, okay, the problem is obviously lack of God, but the next biggest thing is fathers not doing their jobs.
Yep.
They're not either they're non-existent in the families, or they're not raising their sons to be responsible, honorable men. They're not teaching their daughters about how to be a godly woman. The wives are not being led well because the men are advocating their responsibility. And you can pick 99.9% of the problems in the world, and you could probably point almost every single one of them right back to a father, a dad issue.
Yeah.
So I think while we can legislate a lot of these things, I think what we need to have more of an emphasis on, especially you look at like public schools too, dad issues.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, the next best thing, I would say that we need to have more legislation, more harsher punishments on traffickers, harsher punishments on people abusing kids, a lot harsher punishments.
Are you in favor of like the death penalty for that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would go back to Levitical laws. I think there's a lot of wisdom in those, and I know there's a lot of wisdom in those. Yeah, I think there needs to be a lot stricter punishment for abuse, for, and I understand there is a level of, I mean, our laws don't account for that right now, so that is what it is. But I think I would be totally in favor of better legislation towards that,
Yeah.
stricter laws. Yeah.
You then became a police officer. Where were you stationed?
So good segue into police work, because that is what I wanted to do. And going back to my buddy, he is still in the military. He should be retiring soon, but he never became a police officer, and
you
he
really?
still owes me my $100.
This is a
With-
call out.
With inflation, we're talking 20 years. It's at least worth $1 million now.
You're right. Yes, of course.
So I became a police officer in a small town about an hour north of Seattle.
Okay.
And I enjoyed that. I did 8 years there. I knew within a couple of years it wasn't my calling, but I did enjoy my time there.
Yeah. What was that shift like going from Coast Guard, which I would assume is a lot more high pressure, high intensity, to police?
Yeah, because of the nature of what I did in the Coast Guard, there was a lot of downtime, chasing boats, downtime, finally find a boat. And then police, it was more of, and with the Coast Guard, I'm gone for months on end, whereas police work, I am now home every night. And I would work 12-hour shifts, 10-hour shifts, 8-hour shifts, which is a lot different than working 3-month shifts.
Right.
So it was an interesting shift. I enjoyed it. It was definitely a lot faster paced, even though the town I was in was not a super busy town. It wasn't like Seattle, but it was faster paced than what I was used to. But I was young. I was 20, 24, and enjoyed that speed of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said you were a gang detective.
Yeah, so I spent 6 years on regular street patrol, like running the shift work like everyone else did. And then the last 2 years, I did some community service, community resource type work, as well as help develop a gang unit for 3 towns that were close together, separated by a river. And so me from my department and 2 other guys from the other 2 departments got together, and we created a task force to attack the gang problem in the community, because it was pretty rampant.
What was this gang doing?
So there's multiple gangs. There was primarily, we had the Norteños and the Sureños and offshoots of those, as well as an ICP, which was named after a band. I guess it's a Insane Clown Posse, which was a pretty rough. But those were individuals that more stuck to themselves. The main things the gangs did was get into trouble, steal things, and then they would also traffic drugs. Back then, marijuana was still illegal in Washington State, and so that was a big point of trafficking for them.
Yeah. Yeah, marijuana has now become legal. What are your thoughts on the legalization of recreational drugs as a general?
It's a horrible idea.
Really? Why do you say that?
I mean, I don't like legislating things. I think I've said that before, but I think, I think use of marijuana, and people hate the word gateway drug, but you can take, and I won't say people that use marijuana are going to go into other things. However, I will say that if you go to someone who is a cocaine addict or heroin addict, majority of them start with two things: A, marijuana, or B, painkillers.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
But-
you won't say, I won't say that marijuana users are going to become cocaine users, but I will say cocaine users primarily started with one of those two drugs. So is it gateway? I don't know. You can make your own decision, but I think it's definitely a bad idea.
Yeah. But should we be legislating against that?
Yeah, I don't think we should add more legislation for that, but I do think that I do think that if there was a law already in place, stop just adding new laws or taking some of those ones away that are. Yeah, that's yeah. Now you got me thinking about that. I haven't really dug into that too much, but I don't think we should. Yeah, because now I have to go back and say my legislation, I don't like legislating, but at the same time, I think there's a time and a place for it. And I think when it comes to things like that, if you're an adult, make your own decision, but maybe more leave legislation to keeping it away from kids. I don't know. Once again, I can just take this whole thing and say, where are the dads?
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Did you have
question?
Yeah, did you have a moment when in your police work that was like a difficult operation or gang bust that you went after?
Yeah, I had a handful of those. Shootings was a pretty. I don't think the kids running around with guns realized that the guns that they're carrying, which makes them look cool in pictures. And back then, everyone had a MySpace, so I would find the gang kids on MySpace. There's a reason why criminals do dumb things, because they're dumb.
They're generally not.
They're generally not the
intelligent.
smartest tools in the shed. They would post pictures on MySpace with holding their guns, and we go find them. They don't realize that those guns actually kill people. And they would get into a fight, into angry about something, and they would take their gun out thinking it's funny or trying to intimidate someone else and accidentally pulling the trigger, and now we have a dead person or almost dead person. And so that happened periodically, and that was never fun.
Yeah.
Probably one of the worst ones was a guy getting shot in the face with a shotgun.
Ooh.
And that was not fun. That was
Especially
horrible.
for him. That's
yeah,
a rough
he
day.
died 4 hours later.
That's a rough
which
day.
was horrible.
Yeah.
And it was all a fight over a girl. Ridiculous. And someone pulled out a shotgun trying to intimidate. You're not supposed to be around this girl. And the other guy said, I don't have to listen to you. And next thing you know, gun goes off and someone's missing half their face.
Yeah, and then neither of them got the girl because one was in prison and one was dead.
Yep.
So not a good.
So no one wins.
Yeah.
And then everyone around them too. There was like 7 or 8 people associated with that. All the families that it affects. I mean, it runs deep.
Yeah. So how do you? Because we do live in America where the Second Amendment is the Second Amendment, and you are allowed to have guns.
Absolutely.
But
when you're 18 or 17 or 16 and you're running around with a gun and you're a felon, that's where I think the legislation is good.
Yeah, that's where you want more.
The government's job is to protect innocent, to protect people. That's what they wield the sword for.
Right.
And I think if you're wielding the sword for things outside of what you're supposed to do, protecting people, if you're doing it to just make someone not do what you don't want them to do, that's different. But if you're doing it to protect, if the government says, okay, I'm not supposed to hurt you. So because I'm a violent person and I have proven myself to be violent and was convicted in a court of law by my peers that, yes, I'm a violent person and I cause problems, I can't have a gun. And that's protecting you. And I agree with that. And then if I do something, then like if I go and kill you, I should be put to death. There shouldn't be a question about that. If I'm found guilty, I should be put to death. That would create a lot less problems in our country.
Right. I think the lack of strict penalty for these heinous crimes, it doesn't incentivize that you do them, but it doesn't incentivize against them hardly enough.
And even like nonviolent crimes too, right? You think of stealing. So if I steal something from you and it's worth under, let's say, $250, it's a misdemeanor. And judge says, okay, I'm not going to give you jail time and you got to pay him back restitution. Well, I stole something from you worth $200. I got to pay you $200 back. I'm not learning anything. Okay, here you go. I stole $200 from you. Here's your $200 back. And I have no penalty essentially. I got to pay back what I stole, but that's it.
It's like didn't happen.
Right. And maybe I have to do some community service. Okay, maybe I've done it 2 or 3 times. Now I got to serve 10 days in jail. You're going to feed me. Maybe I have to pay $50 a day while I'm in jail, so it costs me a couple $100. I'm not really learning anything. So when you don't have strict laws on restitution either, then that also leads to more problems. And I mean, there was one case I had before I went into the gang task force where we arrested this one individual, and it was her 19th theft conviction. And she would steal things like carloads of things, thousands and thousands of dollars of clothes from stores like from JCPenney's or from Macy's, and go up to this tribal land, and she had a shop up there and would sell them. So her margins are
100%.
Well, her cost of goods is gas money and maybe getting caught once in a while. And if you got caught, then you just had to give back what I mean, sometimes she would do 15, 20 days in jail. She even did 100 days in jail one time, but her operation kept going.
Yeah.
It never shut the operation down.
And it was 100% stolen things that she was selling.
Everything that I've seen her bring over to her store, because we went into her store before, everything that I could recognize all these things that were stolen. I mean, she would cut tags off. So I can't say everything in there was stolen, but I can make a pretty good assumption.
Yeah. And like, how do you not realize, like, surely the police officers would just camp out at the store, right?
Yeah, but you got to prove that it was stolen.
Yeah, but can't you? So like if there's security footage of this woman walking out of the store with this big pile of clothes, and then there's security footage, or you walk into her store.
You can see it. Yeah. We would start, and she would have other people doing work for her too. She wasn't the only person running the operation, but whenever we saw her, the security officers for the loss prevention officers for the stores got to know her real well. And if they saw her, they would just follow her around, and they would stay 5 feet from her and just follow her around until she left. But then it got to the point too where some cities made it so we don't want to have the stores would say we don't want to have a fight or a lawsuit, so you can't touch that person or you can't do it. If they steal anything, you got to let them go. Now some stores have gone back on that now, but that was an issue back then. So I was a police officer from 2003 through 2011. And that became an issue with some stores. They just didn't want to have their security officers getting hurt. They didn't want a lawsuit. So they're so worried about that, because you could be a criminal and get hurt and then sue the store because you were win because you were doing something illegal, but you got hurt.
That's ridiculous. But what do you do about it? Like, if you're
harsher penalties for stealing and not allow judges to allow a lawsuit like that in their courtroom. So better judges too.
Right.
Stricter laws and better judges, stricter penalties not necessarily stricter laws, but stricter consequences for an action, like true restitution. And if you did a capital punishment, true capital execution, I mean, you should be executed for killing someone if it was an executable offense. And if you have stricter laws, you're going to prevent a lot of those issues. But then going back, if you have better fathers, you won't have those issues in the first place, or as many. You shouldn't.
Right. And there's also, I saw something a while ago, but it was like someone posted on Twitter. They were like, hey, what if we didn't broadcast all these serial killers on TV and give them these cool names?
Yeah.
Like, what if we like just caught them and killed them and that was it? Like, surely because a lot of these people, I would assume, are doing this for recognition, so that they can be seen as cool. If we make it, the penalty has to be harsher than the win that they get for I was cool because I was in jail for doing this thing, right?
I think there are individuals that do it for fame. They want to be recognized. And I would say they want to be recognized, at least in some of my experience, is you have a kid who's bullied in school. And he was the uncool kid. No one wanted to be around him. And that does create issues for kids. And I would look at that kid and say, okay, you probably have home issues first, and then you had school issues. So your dad or your mom, or there's abuse at home first, and so that causes issues. But I would say, yeah, some of them do want recognition because they never got that when they were younger. So they're craving someone to approve of them or pay attention to them. I mean, kids will do that too, right? I mean, you and I have probably done that when we were little. We're not getting attention we want, so we do something bad, and we don't care that we get bad attention. We just want attention.
Right.
So that doesn't change when you get older and you get more mature. If you're not given the proper attention when you're a kid and you're not treated well when you're a kid, that's going to, I mean, you still have a responsibility to not let that bother you. And there's a lot of cases where, and I could point to a ton of them, where kids were raised in abusive homes, miserable homes, and did not allow that to affect them when they're older. But if you look at kids that it did affect them, yeah, a lot of times you can see it's because they're seeking that attention somehow. And if we don't give them that recognition, I think that would help other ones who are, maybe they'll find other ways to look for attention instead of doing something huge like a mass murder.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. But I would say that probably is a part of the puzzle for sure.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of hate towards police officers, especially I feel like in the last 6 years, call it. What can that tide be like? What do we need to do to make it so that people respect and love their police officers again?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a two-part to that. There is definitely, having been a police officer, I've also dealt with the officers that are what we would refer to as badge heavy. I'm the law and you will listen to me because I'm the law.
Yeah.
And having an issue with police officers like that need to be removed from their job. We cannot have officers that have ego issues. And I see a lot of them. And they're toxic, and officers that are toxic that'll spread through the rest of the department, and that goes into the community. And I think people in the community need to take responsibility for their own actions. And I think so often when one officer does something wrong, he needs to be held responsible. And most of the time, police officers are held under more scrutiny than a public individual, like someone from the general public. They need to be held responsible, but I think there needs to be a level of forgiveness for police officers too when they do screw up, because they're still human. Like I made mistakes as a police officer, and it wasn't fun. And I remember specifically calling up one individual I'd pulled over, and I was convinced that I had done something right. But then I realized later, I told my sergeant, I think I actually shouldn't have been pulling that person over. And he's like, well, figure out if you can call him up and, make it right. So I did. And it was like I was eating humble pie. But that individual, I find out 2 or 3 years later, ended up she was an alcoholic, and she got arrested. One of the first things she did when she was going through trying to get sober and clean, she came and found me and said, I know that we had our issue that one time, but overall, having an officer come back to me and say that the officer had made a mistake changed her life. And she said that when she was arrested for DUI, she wanted nothing more than to come to that officer who arrested her and come to me and try to figure out how to work together and make things right in her life. So officers need to be able to do something like that. And then people need to understand that officers are not perfect. And I think that'd be a first big step to kind of healing the divide between police and citizens. And police serve citizens. It's not the other way around. And I think that's another thing too is, well, you broke the law. You were going 4 miles an hour over the speed limit. I am going to give you a ticket for $300 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
$150.
I saw a quote from Ronald Reagan the other day. We are a people who has a government, not the other way around.
Yes. Very true. And that's a missed point in our country. I think a lot of there are police officers out there that don't realize that, or realize it and don't care. And so they'll do things like violate your constitutional rights, double down on violating your constitutional rights, and then have a hard time going out in the public and saying, yeah, I was wrong.
That needs to change.
That needs to change.
Yeah.
If a police officer can't go to the public and say, what I did over here was wrong, what I did to you was wrong, and not just to that individual, like definitely to that individual, but if it was a public thing, you got to go to the public and say, I screwed up. I mean, there's cases all over the U.S. in the last 4 years, where officers did things wrong. They need to go and publicly apologize. I screwed up. And then the public needs to understand, if something happened, let's let the system figure out what happened first, and not jump to conclusions and say, oh, the police were wrong, or the citizens were wrong and they got what they deserved, or the police, we need a riot. We can't do that either. Let's let the process figure itself out. It will. We got to trust the process. We got to trust. And if it's unjust, then we need to remove those police officers, and we need to remove those judges from their positions too.
Yeah. So who would you recommend to join the police force?
Someone who does not have a giant ego. If you have an ego, please stay home. And if you're really convinced that you don't have an ego and you are just totally, I am the most humble person, please don't be a police officer. But then I would say, go ask your teachers, ask people who spend a lot of time around you. Do you think I would be a badge heavy police officer? Do you think I would be? And if you're driving around and you're concerned about every mistake that someone else is doing and it really bothers you, you probably have an ego issue. And I'd be concerned about that person being a police officer. But you need to have someone who has a big heart to serve, who loves to serve others, who loves to take care of people. Firefighters are generally that way. We need more police to act like firefighters. And as a police officer, we always have this, hidden animosity, kind of joking animosity. But firefighters have a big heart. And police need to have the heart of a firefighter.
Let's move on to finance, because that's what you've been for the last 13 years and counting.
And I sold my business, so yes.
So we'll start off really simple. Where does this money come from? We recently printed $6 billion for Ukraine.
Yes.
Where is that coming from?
So money is an interesting thing, and fiat currency is an interesting thing. If I owe you, let's just say I got 3 sheep out there. Let's say each sheep is worth an equivalent of 1 cow. And I owe you 1 cow because I borrowed one, butchered it because I was out of meat and I wanted to have a cow. I'm good for it because I have 3 sheep.
Right.
And then George across the street needs to borrow money from you. And you say, well, Tim owes me money, so I'm going to lend some to him because he owes me money. Now we start creating a bit of a circle of who owes who. So money works the same way. Money is just, everyone agrees that a piece of paper that says 1 on it is worth $1. And the only reason why it's worth $1 is because somebody owes someone $1. Or something of value equivalent to that.
Okay.
So money is created through debt. The fiat currency is created through debt. So if we have debt, we have the circulation of money. So when you print $6 billion to give it to another country, all you do is say, we are willing to take on $6 billion worth of debt and give that note to someone else.
Got it. So where are we getting this debt from?
We are saying we are going to produce goods that will be worth $6 billion someday, and then we can recoup that money and pay back those people who we borrowed from, which is you're borrowing from the economy essentially.
Got it. So our current national debt is roughly, I looked it up last night, $35.9 trillion. Who are we in debt to?
Different countries, but primarily you and I. Most of our debt is in U.S. Treasury bonds. Those are debt tools. So we're in debt to ourselves, and that's why they have inflation. Inflation actually will help lower debt, right?
Got it.
Because if you owe $1 to me, and now your dollar is not worth $1 anymore because
It's
your
worth
dollar
75 cents.
your dollar could buy a gallon of milk, but now it can only buy half a gallon. So I just got rid of half of my debt.
Got
So
it.
I only owe you a half a gallon of milk now. I don't owe you a gallon of milk anymore because your dollar has gone away. Half has gone away. So inflation gets rid of some debt. But yeah, so we owe to ourselves. We owe to other countries. Other countries will buy U.S. debt, so buy treasury bonds, and because they know they're secure because the U.S. produces so much goods. So they feel confident that we'll be able to produce stuff, sell it to other people, and then repay that money back.
So what is a treasury bond?
It's just an IOU from the government saying that the U.S. Treasury printed a certain amount of money and it's now in circulation. A certain amount of debt, or allowed a certain amount of debt.
Okay, so like if I were to go get a treasury bond for $100, it's just saying the U.S. the U.S. Treasury printed $100.
And owes you money, or someone owes you money. Any bonds are proof of debt. So like for instance, if you own a home, you have a bond essentially, or you have a mortgage, which is your home is worth a certain amount of money. So there's intrinsic value in your land, in your home, in what you can do with that, or if it's an investment property, or if it's a business that's producing something like a farmland, you can produce crops, you can sell those crops. So that is, if you owe like the field back behind here, if it's 100 acres and it can produce $1,000 per acre worth of grain that can be turned into bread and feed people because people need food, then there's value in that. So the bank will say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll let you, we'll have an IOU system set up because we know there's value in all of that. Someone's going to want that. They're not making more land. They can make more cars, but they can't make more land.
Yeah.
So there's value in that.
Yeah. So inflation makes the debt, eliminates some of the debt.
It lowers the value of the dollar or the value of the dollar associated with that debt.
Yeah. But it also hurts us.
It does. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So who is it benefiting?
Nobody.
Okay.
I mean, I should take that back. Inflation can benefit the government, so they don't have to pay as much of that debt back, so they can still collect more taxes, and they're not putting that tax money towards debt, right? They've never, like, we pay absorbent amount of taxes, but they don't ever balance the budget, and they just keep printing more. So the taxes they're getting has nothing to do with going towards debt. They don't care about that, because debt does keep an economy. So if you like with fiat currency, the debt can keep an economy going, because the more I owe to you, the more I want to work to pay that off.
But only if you do actually want to work.
But only if I do, and only if I do actually produce something. So if I can no longer produce anything, if I can't dig up gold out of the ground, or if I can't dig up precious metals to use for certain things, gold gets used in technology a lot too, right? If I can't get lithium out of the ground, if I can't get steel out of the ground, then I'm running into problems. If I can't get oil out of the ground, I can't do something to produce, and then I run into problems. But as long as I can produce, I'm valuable.
Got it.
And this is where socialist countries come into problems too, because if you're young, you're sucking money out of the economy, so we want to get you to a certain age quickly. But once you get older, you're no longer of value because you can no longer produce.
Right, and there's not going to be a point later in time where you will be able to produce.
No, you're going to eventually be a drain on someone if you don't have enough money. And not, I mean, yeah, it can sound negative, but just in general, an older person is not making money anymore.
Right.
So a socialist country will say, well, they're no longer valuable. That's why they have open laws on killing someone when they're older. Euthanasia.
Exactly. Yeah.
So because they're no longer valuable. That's why I also like socialist health programs too. They hurt the weak and they hurt the elderly. They're designed for the healthy. Their socialist healthcare systems are not designed for the weak and the elderly.
Right.
Because they're no longer valuable. They're not going to, It's only going to be a suck on the system.
They're not producing value, so therefore, why have them at all?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So, the entire debt system, or the entire U.S. economy, is basically based on IOU, correct? Because we no longer are based off the gold standard.
Right. And that stopped back in the,
60s,
well, they started going away from it in 1939.
With Richard Nixon, right?
Yep. Before then.
Oh, really?
And then they went fully away from it. Might have been during Nixon. I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, I think he authorized. I think it was like they started $1 was now worth half of the gold that it was.
You had to have a half backing, right? Correct.
Yeah. So, but now we're at this point where basically the entire U.S. economy is based on IOU.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
And there's no backing anymore. That was lifted in 2021, I think, or 2020, where their banks are not required to have any reserves anymore.
Okay, so there's no fractional reserve banking.
Correct. That was lifted
necessary.
Yes, that was. I don't think that was reestablished either. If I recall correctly, I believe it was 2020 or 2021 around COVID. They lifted all restrictions for fractional banking.
Why would that be good?
It's not good.
Or why would that be good for?
Now banks can leverage more. So banks can loan more money out. So when a bank gets $1, they're allowed to loan a lot more than just that $1 to someone else, right?
Right.
They get $1 from the Federal Reserve, they can loan a lot more out than just that $1. They can multiply it. So when you get rid of fractional banking, you allow more multiplication of the dollar that's already there.
So if the entire system is built on IOU, surely at some point it will collapse, correct?
It has to. I don't think that a fiat system can go indefinitely. I don't see that ever happening.
Right.
And if you look back through all of history, you can go back thousands of years too and find evidence of types of fiat currency, even back during Mesopotamia times, where every system always failed. Now, will this system be the system that never fails? I highly doubt it. Could it happen? I mean, I suppose, but I would be shocked if our system continues going for a long time.
Because we're not paying the debt back to us, correct? To
No,
the U.S.
so
citizens.
It's just creating more and more inflation, and it'll keep doing that until something breaks.
Right. Yeah. And what would break?
The ability for people to pay back debt. And when banks can no longer loan money out because people are no longer borrowing and people can no longer pay back debt, and banks are stuck holding dead paper like they did back in '08 when there was a lot of banks that failed during that time. When that starts happening and people realize that I can't afford, and people stop allowing banks to loan out so much money, I think that would be the point when some of this starts coming down.
Okay. So what is to be done? Because we can't just like start burning all our cash
No,
to eliminate that debt.
we need to go back to a standard, whether it's wheat or gold or oil. I mean, I think gold has always been a tried and true one because there's value in gold outside of just gold being gold. It can be used for things. There's a lot of gold to be found. And I think that's a good standard. It's been used. And it seems like most economies have always gone back to that. At least back in history, they would go away, even in the US, go back to the early days of the U.S. We had a gold backing, and then they would start going into more of a fiat system, and they would go back to the gold standard because it worked well. It was a tried and true method. You can go back thousands of years and see that it's a tried and true method. I think that would be something that would be better for our country, but to get to that point, there's going to be a huge amount of growing pains, and the shift to something like that would be it would be difficult, and there would be a lot of, I think banks would have the hardest time, and banks, central bank, the U.S. central bank, which is the Federal Reserve, people don't like calling it the central bank, but it is a central bank, would have they wield so much power that needs to be pulled away.
Right.
Power needs to be pulled away from banks and brought back to people.
And that is done by
People agreeing that that dollar doesn't have value in itself anymore. The value of the dollar is no longer in debt and needs to be in something physical,
right.
which
Yep.
goes back to a standard.
Yeah. Okay. And so this would be like, okay, fine. Now we have to stop printing money. We have to stop taking on debt. Now we just stop where we are. If that happens, what goes down?
That's a great question, and I don't know how that would play out. I know that if we stopped printing money and we started servicing our debt, we started shifting to a standard. I don't know how that exactly would play out. I can't imagine that it would be an easy shift. I think it would be a very difficult shift. But there's just so much debt that you would have a lot of devaluation of people's money, and that could hurt people too.
Yeah.
Your house is no longer worth $1 million; it's worth 300,000. Now your $300,000 is going to go further because it can buy what we consider $1 million home.
Right.
So there's going to be a lot of that, and there would be a massive amount of growing pains with that, shifting pains. So how that would play out, I don't know. That's something I've dug into it, read a lot about it. There's a lot of different opinions. I don't really have a huge opinion on that because I just think there's so much more that people don't realize that could happen that just people haven't been able to play out. And I think there's a lot of, just like '08, no one expected banks to fail like they failed, people to lose so much the value of their houses, and they didn't expect people to have that many houses go into foreclosure, but it did, and it lasted a certain amount of time. There's a lot of bank bailouts during that time. I think they shouldn't have bailed out banks. I think they should have just let the whole system just rewrite itself. It would have probably rewrite it a lot faster. But yeah, I think it would be a very difficult time. And I think the people that would survive the best are the ones that don't carry a lot of debt, and those that are good at surviving outside of needing things like the latest boat and the latest car and the latest Xbox and the latest phone. Because those people are so used to spending and being a consumer, the people that are used to building and growing
The
economies and
producers
business.
would win.
They absolutely
Yeah.
by a long shot.
Right. But surely that would mean that the people who are extremely wealthy at the moment, wouldn't that incentivize them to put us back on a standard? Because if we were back on a standard, then their money would become worth more, and they're worth so much, and they have so many assets at this moment that it wouldn't cause a complete collapse of their system.
Potentially, I think there's an argument for that, but I would say that just while a lot of them may want to do that, I think the system is been in this we've been in this hamster wheel for so long. I think that it would be very difficult to just shift over. I think it would take decades, and I think there would be a lot of argument for and against it, and that would cause a whole plethora of issues in itself too.
Yeah. Are we able to stop, like, personally allowing the U.S. government to take debt from us?
Congress, I believe, authorizes the Federal Reserve to print money. I'm not sure exactly how that works. That's a great question.
Yeah, because I feel like
Yeah, no, we're not. We shouldn't. And I would say so, yeah, because the Congress allows the increase of the debt ceiling, which is printing more money. So yeah, Congress should. We do have the ability through Congress to stop printing money and stop taking on debt, and require them to lower the debt ceiling, which means they have to pay off debt.
right, and if they paid off debt, that would look like people in the United States getting money from the government. Correct?
Essentially, because it would make the value of your dollar worth more. Well, it would to a certain point.
Yes.
Because if there is, with fiat currency, this is the tricky part with fiat currency. We assign a value to that based on debt. So if there is no debt,
Right.
that dollar doesn't mean anything. It's worthless.
Right. So it'd have to be a standard first and then pay back the debts.
Correct.
Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Right.
Because the whole system is based off. If I pick up a candy bar, I now owe you $1 worth of candy. Right. And I pay that back with, here's this money, which you can use to then go take on debt elsewhere.
Right, because that dollar represents someone else's debt.
Yeah. So,
and then that person's dollar represents someone else's debt. And so that circle keeps growing. The circle of debt keeps growing. So as long as people owe someone money, then there is intrinsic value. We assigned value in that based on the fact that we know someone down the road owes money to someone else.
But that's all based off the faith that someone will eventually pay that.
Yes.
And
eventually you get to the point where it's not feasible for the economy or the country to pay that.
Right. I also looked up the GDP of the U.S. last night, and it was basically 26 trillion, which is 10 trillion less than the debt. At what point do we lose all faith in our ability to pay it back, and the whole thing collapses?
I don't know if there is a specific point in time when that happens, but if I make $10,000 in a year and I owe $15,000 on my house, or use more realistic numbers, let's say an average person makes $100,000, but they owe $300,000 on their house. Is that too much debt for what they make? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it's a huge amount of debt, right? But what are they doing? They're putting a good portion, 30-40% of their income towards that debt.
Yeah.
What are we as a country doing with our tax money? The tax money of the government, the country is producing a certain amount. That's the whole country. That's not what the government's taking in. They're taking in however many trillions of dollars. Is that going to the debt? Well, so much of it's not going. It's going to service just the interest. And it's going to a lot of other special projects. So those need to go away.
Special project.
We can pay off the debt. I don't think paying off the debt is necessarily the biggest issue right now. I think the issue is just there's no incentive for them to pay off the debt, and we the people are not requiring our senators and holding their feet to the fire, saying you got to pay it off. We will scream and holler about, hey, we're too much in debt, but no one's really doing anything about it. So there's no incentive.
Right. What do you mean by service the interest rate?
So we're servicing the interest on the debt. So we loan you get a treasury bond and it's paying 5%. You loaned $100 to the government. They say, okay, we'll pay you $100 back someday in 30 years, but in the meantime, we'll pay you 5% interest on that $100, and we'll keep that $100. At the end of 30 years, you'll have collected 5% interest every year, and we'll pay you your principal back. So what they're doing right now is they're not planning on ever paying that principal back. They're not even keeping up with servicing the interest rate payments, which is why they're going to have to lower interest rates again, because the money that was coming in can't even take care of that, because we're sending $6 billion to other countries, millions here, millions there, millions here, to service all these other obligations that have nothing to do with debt service, which should be our first obligation, because that's what they borrowed against.
Right. And so, but debt can be a good thing.
Sure.
But only if it is backed by something, right?
Yeah, and I think using debt I think debt can be used well, but I think you have to be careful on saying I wouldn't say necessarily debt is a good thing. I think we have to be careful what we owe people. I mean, Bible talks about, don't owe anything to your neighbor. So I think there's a time where you should be striving to not owe anything to anyone.
Right.
Now, you can use it to leverage things to do good, because that's the way our system's set up. I would prefer to never have debt in our country. Even though I use debt, I leverage banks, I leverage debt all the time. And I love doing that, because I think I love how the economy works in some senses, because I can use it to my advantage. But I think that is debt, the more you allow debt to, the more disproportionate it becomes towards people that don't make very much, and actually hurts them more than anyone, because I can afford to take on more debt, whereas someone else can't. So I think there's issues there, but in that sense, I don't think debt's good, because I think we need to not be in debt to anyone. But going back to what I said, I think you can leverage it well and do good things with it.
And there are times when, my dad has bought buildings and used debt for those, but it is based on something.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? He says, I'm backing this debt with a physical asset.
And banks usually won't allow you to back debt with nothing. So, yeah, you're going to have
unless
to back
you're the federal government.
Unless you're the federal government.
In which case,
they back it they back it with what we can produce.
Right.
That's what they're backing it on, what they believe we're going to produce.
Got it.
So it's backing on a little bit of something, but yeah.
And essentially, that's what you mean by the Federal Reserve is a giant bank. Because they are basically taking all of the money that we pay them in taxes, correct? And investing that into the military, into where are they putting
infrastructure, military, special projects. I mean, there's a lot of things. If you go through, you sit in a city hall finance meeting sometime and listen to what they spend money on. Just like a simple city, like our city, and it's shocking all the little things that they'll spend money on that are an absolute waste of our tax dollars.
Yeah,
it's insane.
I mean,
and the government is just at a bigger scale.
Right. I mean, the Moscow, Idaho has, I think, $110 million budget per year. The government, city government of Moscow, Idaho. We are a town of 26,000 people. I do not think we produce $110 million every year.
And if they do, they might produce that much. Maybe I haven't looked at all the balance sheets and the data on that. I would say that if they have a budget that big, they have massive. I would venture to guess there's a huge portion of that going to special interests that should never be in there. Have nothing to do with the government.
Right.
including healthcare stuff. Nothing to do with the
Yeah.
government.
So moving in
Mhm.
reverse, what is the deal with the Federal Reserve Bank?
So, yeah, great question. The Federal Reserve, I mean, that was created in the early 1900s. They tried it multiple times. And then if you go to 1913, I believe, there was a meeting at Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. A lot of bank and some senators got together to create a central bank. J.P. Morgan was a big part of this. There was a lot of smaller banks in communities that were taking his share of the pie, and he wanted to control the flow of money. And so they said they were not going to call it a central bank because there was bad stigma with the central bank. We just come out of Europe. European central banks caused a lot of problems. They didn't want a central bank, so we'll call it the Federal Reserve, and we're only going to use it if we need to use it. Of course, World War I comes up 5 years later, and we need to borrow money, but we'll pay it back. We're going to borrow money so we can pay companies to build ammunition and tanks and whatnot for the war. After the war. So that's how it all started.
What did it originally do?
Just like any central bank, it was there to control the flow of money to banks, so that and they were not required to be backed by as much gold. I don't know all the numbers on how much was backed by at that time, but less gold backing, and they would control how much money went to certain banks and how much they could then lend out to people in their communities. So it gave, in my opinion, a lot more power to large banks, because they could then come in and control interest rates. They wanted to control, as another part of it, they wanted to control interest rates so that if the economy went down, they could raise rates or lower rates to boost it up, make borrowing cheaper. Instead of allowing the economy to do that, they would be able to control interest rates better and level out the ups and downs in the economy or in the marketplace.
Got
So
it.
that, while it and I'm going to assume they had good intent. They may have had good intent in trying to keep the economy from experiencing higher highs and lower lows and try to level it out more. I don't think they accomplished that, but
Right. So we would pay our tax dollars to the Federal Reserve.
it still goes to the federal government.
Still goes to the federal government.
The government authorizes, and I think that's how it goes, the government authorizes the Federal Reserve to print money, or authorizes how's that go?
So the government, okay, we received
Congress
this
allows
much,
it,
this much in taxes, so you have the ability, because that's, you have the ability to print this much based off of the money that they have produced.
Yeah, so
Right?
the Congress
I'm lost
allows the
here.
government to print off money.
Okay.
That money gets given to the central bank, and the central bank gives it to individual banks based on their needs.
So they're not the inflow, they're the outflow.
Right.
Got
Yes.
it. Okay. And I'm sure they take a bit of a margin for their work.
I'm sure they do. Yep. They're making a significant amount of money too.
Yeah. Okay. So how does a regular human being finance and lever the system in a way that is beneficial to themselves?
First off, having the ability to pay back debt, knowing your ability to pay that debt back, and then using that to buy something that's going to produce something of value for someone else.
And this is debt that, this is if I were to take out a loan for a car. This is not, there's no hidden debt that we don't know about, right? If this debt that you're talking about that we should be able to pay back, that is only debt that you've taken out.
Correct. Right.
There's no hidden debts that I have no idea I have. Correct?
Well, you owe money to I mean, that's why we pay taxes, right? So
Right.
because we the people owe $36 trillion to ourselves and other countries, which is why our dollar is worth so little now, right?
Right.
So that is your debt as well. That's
Okay.
not just because the government doesn't exist without the people,
Right. Have the ability to pay your taxes, basically.
right? Because if no one pays taxes, what happens to the debt? It all defaults. And who holds that debt? Other countries, but primarily U.S. We hold our own debt.
Yeah.
So individuals like you or I can go buy a treasury bond. So
Debt to
we're allowing the government to say, okay, I'll hold our own
take
debt.
more debt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Continue. Sorry, I just wanted
No,
to clear
that's
that up.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
So how does someone lever the system?
So using debt in a wise way, not overextending yourself. I mean, I think that's basic economics. I think a lot of people don't realize, the bank says I can borrow X amount of money. Are you trusting the bank to tell you exactly how you should be living? And I think people need to be careful with that and not over leveraging yourself. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to use debt, borrow because you're working, know that you're going to keep your job or be self-employed, know that you can produce, and then using that debt to buy other companies, continue producing. As long as what you're buying is able to produce, I mean, I understand the need for vehicles, which are a liability. I understand the need for fun things, but they're liabilities.
Right.
But just being able to, like, we're such a consumer-driven country. We're so fixated on me. I need to have the best of the best of everything. And we don't think enough about how do I be a producer, not just a consumer? How do I build something bigger than myself for other people? How do I bless other people?
Right.
So if you're using your debt just to go, buy a $150,000 Ferrari every year, yeah, maybe you can afford it, but that's foolish because you're not. I mean, maybe you're giving someone a job here and there, but I think that's the problem with negative debt. So I think the leveraging of the good debt is using it for building businesses, using it for buying land, buy properties, buy real estate.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Use debt in order to be able to go farther than you could by yourself.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
As though it's another person.
Right, because it's difficult sometimes, especially if you're making $100,000 to save up enough over the next 20 years, knowing that the government's going to deflate the value of my dollar.
Right.
Now,
so you want to buy assets.
Right. So if the government wasn't allowed to deflate our dollar through arbitrary means like printing cash or adding more debt to our system, then it would be easier to save up money and go buy something because you knew that the value of that's not going to creep away from you.
Yeah.
Because if you want to buy a house and it's going to cost, $500,000 today, and you say, okay, I'm going to save up, $50,000 a year for 10 years. Do you think that house is worth $500,000 in 10 years?
No.
I mean, in today's dollar, it shouldn't ever change, but because inflation is killing our dollar, the money you're saving is now being eaten up by other people's debt.
Yeah. And then the government says to other countries or private interests or whatever it is, hey, we will pay you back based on the money that we're receiving in taxes and that we're producing.
Yep.
Got it. Okay. So as far as investing and because it feels like if you invest, you may invest really well, but can you keep ahead of the curve? What are things like an S&P 500 or a 401k? Talk me through those. What are they exactly?
Yeah, so 401k, 403b, Roth IRA, traditional IRA, those are just a code in a tax book that allows you to have certain tax qualifications for certain money. So you can have a 401k And the tax code says that if you put money into this 401k, into this basket, then you earn $100, put $1 in there. We're only going to pay income tax on the $99. You'll defer this $1 until you take it out. Now,
And then you have to pay taxes on the $1 you took out
when you
take it
get
out.
when you get down the road, you'll pay tax on that $1 plus any interest that it earns in the meantime.
Got it. Of
So the
course.
difference between this is where I've always recommended go after the Roth 401k or Roth IRA, because the dollar you put in there, you're still going to pay tax on that today, but then every dollar of interest that it earns will be tax free when you take it out.
And how is it earning interest?
You can invest into the S&P 500 or other stocks, and the S&P 500 is just an index. So it's a conglomeration of about 500 companies and their average value, and that allows us to see how the overall economy is potentially working.
Got it.
So
Okay.
Walmart or Costco or Home Depot, or these companies may be in the S&P or the Dow Jones. But then the value of those companies is aggregated to give us a ballpark area of what the economy is doing.
Okay. So if I put my money into a Roth IRA and then
Which is a shell.
Right.
Like a
And then I
savings.
take that Roth IRA
Take the money that's in the Roth.
basket and invest it in the S&P 500. Everything I earn from the S&P 500 will not be taxed.
In the Roth IRA, correct?
Yes,
Correct.
but if I pull that money out of the Roth IRA to spend it, will it then become taxed once I pull it out?
Great question. So the principal you put into a Roth IRA, you've already paid taxes on that, so you can take that money out. The interest has to stay in there for a minimum of 5 years or until you reach age 59 and a half. So if you're 56, you got to wait till 62 to take the interest out, or 59 and a half. So there are some rules on what you can do with those accounts.
Wait, as like a human being?
Yeah.
Or as a
If you take money out, you can take it out, but then you'll pay on the interest, you'll pay taxes and a 10% penalty.
Okay. Why 59 and a half?
Government.
So if
It's the
I
only
were
word
to,
I have.
that's ridiculous. So wait, so
Yes.
if
The
I put
incentive program was they were trying to incentivize people to save money and not touch it until retirement.
which was
That was the idea behind it.
got it. Okay. So I put $100 in the Roth IRA and then
Mhm.
I put and are there different kinds of Roth IRAs, different brands, or is it just a
Roth
Roth
IRA.
IRA? Okay. I put $100 in a Roth IRA. Then I invest that Roth IRA in the Dow Jones.
Sure.
And let's say the US GDP goes up by 20%, so I pull out I have $120 in there now.
The value of those companies went up. Sure. Yep.
Right. I can then pull out the $100 whenever I would like and not be taxed on that because
'Cause
I've
you've
already
already
paid
paid
taxes
taxes, yep.
on it. And so if I were to pay taxes on it, I'm paying taxes before I put it in there, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So if I were to take that $100, let's say I only have 89 at the end of taxes and that's generous probably, but 89 to put in there.
Yep.
And then I earn 20% on that. I can take the 89 out,
Sure.
but then I have to wait to take out the extra
Interest.
$18 until I am 59 and a half, or until it is 5 years after
You put it in there.
5 years after the interest goes in there,
Yeah.
or
5 years
years
from when
after
you
the-
establish that account.
after I establish the principal. Got it. Okay. So I could technically put in my $100 and then in 5 years it's earned $20 more, and then I could pull that all out.
The $20, but are you 59 and a half yet?
No,
You
let's
still
say
have to
let's
reach
say
the age of 59 and a half to touch that $20.
or I'm
Or you-
5 years.
5 years is a minimum, or up to 59 and a half. You have to be at least 59 and a half. But if you put that money in there at 58, you can't take it out. If the principal is still free, but the interest still has to stay in there till 58 to 63 because it's 5 years.
Not 59 and a half. But if I'm
Because 59 and a half would happen before the 5 year mark. So you need at least hit the 5 year mark.
okay, but I could also, if I'm 22,
Yep.
which I'm not, but let's say I was 22 and
Mhm.
then I put that $100 in when I'm 27, which is 5 years later after I put the principal in, could I pull all that $120 out? Or do I have to leave that $20 in there till I'm 59 and a half?
Correct. To your 59 and a half.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Those rules
Very
apply
ridiculous.
to the interest on Roth accounts, not the principal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you've already paid taxes
in a
on the
regular
principal.
traditional IRA or a 401k, it applies to the whole lot.
Right. So if I were to pull out that $120, I could do it when I'm 24.
You can do whatever you want. You're just going to pay taxes on it as income tax, whatever income tax bracket you're in, plus up to 10% penalty.
For pulling it out before I'm 59 and a half or before 5 years?
Before pulling it out before you're 59 and a half.
Okay. So you still get, so there's basically zero advantage to putting it in a 401k. Is that correct?
No, because a lot of companies will have a 401k and say, okay, if you put, because the company is going to get a benefit, a tax write-off. So they'll give you a match and say, if you put in 4% of your pay, we'll put in 4% of your pay. We'll match that.
Surely that's just 8% of your pay.
Yeah, but it's 4% from you and 4% from the company. So you're getting a 4% raise, essentially, but you're deferring that money into your retirement account. So I think they're a good tool. Yeah. I think all investment accounts are a good tool, but like anything, do you put all of your money in? Do you double down on wooden buffalo chips, or do you double down on your 401k, or do you double down on land? Everyone's got a different opinion on that.
Right.
I don't think you should have all your money in one spot by any means.
Generally
and while I like 401ks, I think there's a use for them. I like Roth IRAs, that there's a use for them. By no means am I going to stick all my money in that. And I think if you do, that's not wise.
Right.
But I think for so many years people have.
Yeah. And that,
because they're not good at saving, so they want the 401k because it forces them to save some money. Yeah. Because they're not disciplined enough to save on their own.
Okay.
Not everyone, but that's general rule.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. So how are some people, especially the extremely wealthy, able to pay so few taxes?
Oh, we could write a book on that. That's a huge question. So it really depends on how their corporate structure is, how they're taking their pay. Are they taking it in cash as regular income? Are they taking it as stock, selling it later, but keeping their income low? There's a whole the tax code is well over 1,000 pages. So there's a lot of different ways to circumnavigate taxes as a business owner. So depending on how you take your income, if you're taking capital gains from your company or there's so many different ways you can take income off of a business. You can write off losses on your business if you have a bad year, carry a certain amount forward. So there's tax advantages for that. There's so many different ways to do it. It really depends on structure of a business. Every business is different.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Okay. But you have to be a business owner to do that, correct?
Generally, yes, because if you're not a business owner, you're getting a specific amount of pay as a wage, and that's considered earned income, so it's taxed a very specific way. Okay. Now, there's still write-offs and your standard deductions you can use, which is for the average person, but
yeah, but that surely also would mean that the U.S. government would be incentivized to print less cash, given that they can't track cash, and therefore they're not earning taxes on it, right?
To print less cash?
Like if you print $100 and I clean up your yard and you give me $100, the government has no idea what just happened.
Correct. Yeah. So that's why they like the idea of these cash apps and ways of exchanging money, because then they can control what comes and goes, right? Because now Cash App is telling you, oh, you shifted more than $600, so we're going to give you a 1099 and or 1098. You got to go file that with your taxes because that could have been income. We don't know. So you got to prove it is or isn't. Yeah. That could be it is definitely, it's having less cash in the economy or less paper money that is representative of debt in an economy allows more oversight from the government.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yes.
And as far as like people who are looking to invest, when you're looking at investing as a business, what markers or um, points of interest are you looking at that would make you say like, hey, this is a good thing to put your money into, this is a bad thing to put your money into?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think cash flow is part of it. There's a lot of pointers. Just like any business you're going to buy, you want to see how the businesses work, how their cash flow is, what kind of debt they hold. You want to look at what they're producing, what's the upside potential for that for whatever good they're producing, what's the margins, what's the future for that portion of the economy. There's a lot of those things you're going to look for. Now, when it comes to individual stocks, I don't actually, and I mean, I can say this now too. I'm no longer in the business. I sold my business. I don't actually own a single stock.
Why not?
Because I want to know the company that I own, and I trust real estate. I trust small private businesses more than large corporate businesses. I trust businesses that don't carry debt, and most of these large companies all carry debt. So I think there's good in them.
Right.
I've owned and made a lot of money off of a lot of these large corporations, but I also like to know what they're, and part of it too is more of a personal choice, is that I know a lot of these companies support things that I just don't believe in, like abortion or euthanasia or
Right.
drug running or pharmaceuticals that are similar to drug running. I don't support a lot of those things, so I don't want to have my money supporting those companies.
Right.
And I prefer small businesses because I can see that I can go talk to the CEO. I can sit across the table from him. I can have a drink with him. I can see how they're working and what they're doing for that economy, and I want to put my money into those. So I think those are great places to put money. Now, you still have to be careful with that too, because there's a lot of small businesses and small towns that want your money. And if they do want your money, that can be a red flag too.
Right.
Right? Because if they're a really successful small business, they don't need your money. So there's differences, and not all of them are like that. I think you have to really be aware of what they're trying to do and what their big picture is. And really it comes down to vision. If you can find a CEO who's a really, really good visionary, that makes a big difference too. So understanding who's at the top and what kind of a visionary they are, what's their track record of producing and building.
That's the kind of thing. But generally, those people are not on the stock market.
They're not going to be on the stock market. No, they're going to be private equity, private placements.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. Austin recently opened their own Texas stock market as opposed to the New York Trade Index.
Oh, yeah.
What is that a good thing or a bad thing?
You know, that's interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily going to, I mean, it could be a money maker for them. They're trying to have more control over smaller companies that are at the whim of the S&P and of, big businesses. So I don't know if I have much of an opinion on it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting question though. But and it's interesting that they're doing that. Knowing Texas, I'm sure it's just to eliminate big government from small government.
Yep.
And I think that's a good thing.
I'm a fan of that.
Get rid of the federal government as much as possible. Keep them in their corner of what they're supposed to do, which they're good at getting into everyone's business.
Yep. As far as putting the U.S. dollar onto some sort of standard, right? What are your thoughts on backing it on some sort of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum? I don't know what. I think those are the big two. But
those are the big two.
Yeah.
Bitcoin, probably the most stable one. I think there is a scenario where that could work, but that would need to be fleshed out a lot. And that's such an unknown because this is such a new market, and it does have trading value because of what technology has done in our world. So there is value there. I think that would be a massive undertaking, just like moving to the gold standard, if not even harder. And like with Bitcoin and Ethereum, you can now buy Bitcoin on the stock exchange through an exchange traded fund. So my concern now with going to something like that is that, once again, can it be manipulated?
I don't know,
know.
but they're going to
I mean, you can buy gold
do their
through
best.
gold ETFs too, but I get concerned about that being controlled.
Yeah.
So once again, I keep going back saying, well, I would say that because Bitcoin there's a finite amount of Bitcoin.
Right.
If I have Bitcoin on a key card and I burn that key card, where I can no longer get those coins off of there, the numerical data off of there, those coins are gone forever.
You can't replace them.
You cannot replace them.
Yeah.
It's irreplaceable. So there's a finite 21 million, I think is what it is, Bitcoin in circulation total that will ever be in circulation ever. It will never go more. It can only go less. So eventually that number will, if you stretch out time long enough, can go down to zero, right? There'll be none left.
Right.
So then what? So there is an end game for that too.
But that's true of gold too. I mean, there's a finite amount of gold on our planet.
Sure. Well, we think so.
There
there is, but I mean, I'm saying, like, they've talked about like asteroids having gold on them too. So is there a finite amount? Yeah, I would say there is, but at the same time, I would say because you can mine gold, it won't create. I don't think it'll create inflation. It could create a little bit of inflation, but a very small amount. But I think that would, because you can go get more. It's going to incentivize people to work and dig and find more, use the resources that we've been given. Whereas Bitcoin, okay, it's all found. Here's all what we have. We're going to split the pie up. If you lose it, it's gone. That's a concern for an economy over time as well. I think short term it would work great, maybe over 100 years, maybe even 200 years. But I think long term it would be another problem.
It could be another issue.
Yeah.
How do people start saving more money and making their dollars go a little farther? Especially, I think that's a big concern right now.
That is. It's a huge concern right now. I mean, most families, they're spending so much more on just your basic food. And I would say some of the basic things is, what kind of subscriptions do you have? Are you subscribed to Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Spotify, whatever else? Are you nickeling and diming yourself to death? So many people do that and don't even blink an eye on that. Oh, it's only $20 a month. Oh, it's only $15 a month. It's okay. Before you know it, they're spending $300 a month on subscriptions or random things. Or, I need to have my latte every morning. I only pay $2.50 for it. Well, now it's probably like $4. Okay. And you're doing that 5 days a week. And
Run
you're
the
spending
math.
25. And so you make $75,000 or $100,000 and you're concerned because you can't make it. Yes, food costs have gone up and you need to probably make more money. But part of the problem is not the fact that you need to make more money, is that you need to spend less. And just be wise about what you're spending money on. There's a million deals to be had. I know when my wife and I were first married, and on a police officer's salary back in 2004, didn't make a lot of money. And so we wanted to get out of debt. I wanted to have no more debt. And so we buckled down and said, okay, we don't have, God hasn't blessed us with kids yet. Our grocery budget is going to be, I think it was like $50 a week. And so I was on the graveyard shift. Me and the guys would go out and have a cup of coffee around 3 or 4 in the morning at the local grocery store. And they'd buy a donut and a cup of coffee, and it's very, very stereotypical. And I would literally walk. I had my own spending budget. I would have no more than $20 for a whole month. That's what I gave myself because I wanted to get out of debt. And I would find pennies on the ground because I could buy a cup of coffee and a donut for $1, but there was tax. And I would, if I was driving around and I saw a nickel, I would pick it up. And I could have for 4 weeks, I could spend $1 a day, 5 days a week, if I found enough nickels to pay for the tax. And I could go have that every single day. And so I would do those things, something little like that. And we got out of debt fast because I was disciplined to do that. And now I was also undisciplined before that, which got me into debt in the first place. But I realized I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I've told that to so many people. When you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you'll make a change. Up until then, you don't want it enough.
Nothing changes if nothing changes.
Nothing changes, exactly. And I coach football, and I've told the boys too. And there's a guy who had this talk on to a bunch of boys, football boys, and I don't remember what his name was, but he talked about that this guy took him out into the water, had this conversation with him, bringing him out further. He was going to teach him how to be rich, this guru. And eventually he gets out to the water where it's up to his neck, and the guru drags him underwater and holds him there. The guy's fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And he's about to pass out, and the guru picks him back up again. And he says, if you want to be successful as badly as you wanted to breathe in that moment, then you'll be successful. Otherwise, you're just going to keep coasting. You don't want it bad enough. So if you want to win bad enough and you want to push yourself bad enough, it goes with anything. If you want to read your Bible every morning bad enough, or if you want to be disciplined in loving your wife and your kids well enough, if you want to be a good father, if you want it bad enough, you'll do it. If you don't, nothing's going to change. And if you want to be successful in business, you will. But if you don't really want it, or if you don't want the work, you won't.
Right. Yeah. We'll shift topics a little bit. Hunting. Yeah.
That's not my favorite topic.
Not your favorite topic? Are you sure?
Yeah.
First off, there's quite a bit of, especially environmentalists, who are like, how dare you hunt because you're killing all these animals. Mm-hmm. Do you ever deal with that? And if so, what's your response?
I actually have not dealt with that very much. Thankfully, most people, and even with my business too, there's a handful of clients that were strict vegetarians and hated hunting, respected my position on it, and didn't give me a lot of pushback. And I think most people are pretty good about that. And I just tell them, I'm just trying to protect your food source because these animals are eating your food. So I'm protecting it. Now, that doesn't usually go over very well. But
I have no idea why.
Yes. But I haven't had a lot of pushback on that. I think there are, just like in any business or in anything, there's going to be people like police officers, for instance. There's a bad police officer. There's bad hunters. There's people that do stupid things that don't respect an animal's life and just kill for the sake of killing. And I think that's a problem. And that is a problem in hunting, just as bad cops are a problem in policing. So there's bad hunters out there that are not ethical. And so I teach hunters education as well. And I've taken my children out hunting. And my rule is, if you're going to kill something, you will eat it. So If you're not willing to eat it, I don't want you killing it. So we're killing for a food source, not for the sake of killing. Now, do I love going out hunting and the thrill of the chase and trying to outsmart an animal? Absolutely. And some people will think, well, that's horrible, that's mean. Well, how is that any different than you locking up a cow in a little tiny corral for 18 months of his life and then killing it? Like, I think that's more mean, actually.
Yeah. At least the deer gets to live its full life.
It does. It's living a life, and it's not sitting there, it's able to find food. And an animal out in the wild too has it difficult already, right? I mean,
if you don't get them, the cougar will.
Or the wolf,
right.
or the bear. And if people saw how inhumane other animals are when it comes to killing. And then, and if you go to butcher shops too, I mean, butcher shops are great, but there's these massive places where they slaughter thousands and thousands of animals a day or birds a day. I don't want my food coming from there. It grosses me out, and I'm sure they're clean. I'm not going to say they're not clean, but I want to know where my food came from. I want to know what goes into my food. And I know when I go kill a deer, I know what the thing's been eating, generally speaking.
Yeah.
I can guess. I have a pretty good guess. And I know it's not been around people. It's not been around chemicals. It's not been around all this other processed stuff. I know where my food came from.
Yeah.
And so I want to be healthy. And I'm a big health nut. I love being out in the wild. I love being out in nature. Creation is an amazing place. And being out there with my sons, doing difficult things, making them get up at 2 a.m, hiking for hours, waiting for an animal, rain, snow, sleet, thunder, lightning, you name it, trudging back with 50, 60, 80 pounds in your back of gear, and getting back to your camp at 9 p.m. It's dark, make dinner, trying to dry things out, and go do it again and do it for a week. It is hard, but my sons do that, and they do it with joy, and they embrace that, and they don't complain. And so it's more than just hunting. Hunting is a big part of it. Harvesting an animal is a big part of it. We love to do that, but I also want to just be out there with them and do extremely difficult things, because I know that's going to lead to them being better leaders, better husbands, better fathers, better people in society, because they're doing difficult things and they know how to overcome adversity.
Yeah. Have you ever had to deal with predators trying to take your kill?
I never did. I was with my uncle hunting, and he had a bear ripping his deer apart that he had gotten, and it took us a while to get that animal away. But it wasn't my animal, thankfully. But yeah, that doesn't happen very often.
Really?
Usually most predators are still scared of you for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. And there's also a component to it, like it feels like you're in nature.
Yes.
And you kind of
Yes.
feel alive. There's this wonderful Instagram account called Nature is Metal. I don't know if you've seen it, but they
haven't.
do, like, it's basically just, hey, look, nature isn't as clean and cutesy as you think.
Yes.
They recently posted a video, and it's which I've seen a bunch of times, if not that video, similar videos, and it's the bear out in Alaska catching the salmon, and they just catch it, hold it down, and then rip its skin off while
Where
it's
the
still
fat is,
alive. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's other ones too where you'll see wolves eating caribou or elk alive, and the animal has like a portion of his hindquarter missing, and it's not dead.
Yeah, and they're still
Brutal.
It's
I mean,
rough.
horrible, horrible pain that animal's going through. And when I'm hunting and I shoot an animal, it's dead.
Right.
Like,
it's
it
a
doesn't
lot
suffer.
more humane.
And yes, there's some people and there's bad shots. I've made a bad shot one time, and it was not fun. I chased that animal down as fast as I could to
Finish the job.
because
Right.
I don't like that it was suffering, but that does happen.
Yeah.
But the chances of that happening with a hunter versus nature is way less. I
Yeah.
mean, almost virtually every single kill, right? Because most kills from animals are drawn out. Like a cougar killing an animal is not really fast. I mean, maybe depending how small it is, but that deer is running for its life for a while, knowing that there's an animal trying to kill it, and it's not over fast. And bears too, and when
Bears
they
are
get
the
their
worst.
mouths around its neck, usually it's over fast. But if it's a big animal like an elk or a caribou or a moose, you know it's going to be a slow death, a very slow. It could be hours.
Yeah. It's a rough day to be a moose.
It's a rough day to be a moose.
What are your thoughts on trophy hunting?
So there's stages for hunters. Hunters go into stages. The first stage is when they get their license and they're first hunting, and they're just excited to get their first kill. And then they start working more into Now I want to get a bigger animal, and then it goes into a more of a trophy stage, and then it goes into I just love nature stage. And I've been in the trophy stage, and I still love to get a big trophy. Now, when I'm killing a big trophy, what people don't realize, if I see this, I'm searching and I'm passing up deer, or I'm passing up animals that I'm not killing. I'm not killing the 3-year-old buck. I'm looking for that old 8 or 9-year-old, which is near its end of its life expectancy, and it somehow has managed to survive all this time, and I get excited about killing that animal. That's great. The animal is most likely at the peak or towards the end of its life expectancy. So a trophy hunter, if they're just going for large animals, or if they're going to go to another country like Africa and go after a lion or something like that, most hunters, when they're doing that, they're not doing it because they're doing it because they want to get the big trophy. But the animal, they understand too that animal is near its life expectancy anyways. So we're actually letting the younger ones go in favor of going after the older ones.
But as far as like going to Africa and hunting lions, you're not going to eat the lion.
The locals will.
Really? Okay.
Sure.
So
I would eat a lion.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with that. I mean, and if you talk to so they're guided hunts in Africa, and if you talk to a guide in Africa, and they're going to go after a lion, one of the big animals like a lion or an elephant, they're going to give a tag. That area is going to give a tag for an elephant, because that elephant has been causing problems. It's usually a bull, a younger bull, or it's a sick one they need to cull out of the herd. A lot of times, and I had a friend of mine went and killed an elephant with a bow, which is wild, and he did a good job and killed it very quickly, which is incredible. Amazing photos and videos of this whole hunt, and it was a younger bull that was terrorizing a town, and they couldn't get rid of it. So they said, "We need to kill this thing," and they said, "Well, let's bring in a hunter." He paid $50,000. 40,000 of it went to that community, and they got the meat from the animal.
So it's kind of a win-win for them.
A huge win. Yeah. They got rid of the problem, and they got meat, and they got resources. A huge win for them.
Yeah,
and he got a win. He got to part with some of his money he didn't want, and he got a trophy. So everyone wins in that situation.
Right. Because I've seen photos on, I think mainly Instagram, of these guys that go out there, and clearly they're not chasing the animal down. They've just been driven up to a location, and then they just shoot the lion, and then they pose up with it.
That's usually those hunts, like in Africa, a lot of those specialized hunts, like with lions that are causing problems, or they need to call a sick lion, or an elephant, are going to be in those situations. Okay. You're not going to, it's not going to be, and that's, yes, I mean, okay, that's not ideal. I would love to spend a week trying to find an elephant and kill it. But if this lion is clearly sick and we need to kill it, put out of his misery, I mean, is that really a hunt for me? Personally, I don't like that idea. I would never do that.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to fault someone else for doing that.
It makes more sense that the lion is already, or the elephant is already a problem.
Yeah.
And they're doing this to help out, in a sense. I did not know that, and I assumed it was just like, hey, I just want to go get a lion and just go kill a lion, whatever lion works, which I don't love. What I would love to do is build some sort of protective armor, and then just go try and,
go fight
one hand-to-hand combat. I think that would be awesome. That's a way, like, if
you
die
by his beard like David, right?
Yeah, like if you die, okay, at least you went out like a G.
Yeah.
But that's good to know, because I've always assumed that it was just mainly it's old fat guys who just go out there and just sit on a truck and shoot it, and that's it.
And it's a lot of times that image comes to mind, because a lot of those people they're not being productive at home, or they have so much money and time that they, usually someone like you or I, maybe I'm older than you,
Potentially.
We don't we're not at that stage in life where we have that much freedom or resources to go out and kill a lion, or we don't want to.
Yeah,
Right?
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for the average human like myself who has never been hunting,
You've never been hunting?
I've never been hunting.
I am so sorry.
Why should I get into hunting?
You should only get into hunting if you truly care about animals. Yes. That's almost a mean statement. No, I would say get into hunting because you enjoy the taste of the meat.
Okay.
I mean, that's a huge part of it for me. I love wild game, and we know how to prepare it. And I like to know where my meat is coming from. That's why I have animals out in the field. I want to know where my food comes from. I love being out and doing difficult things with my sons, and my daughter wants to go out too. I'll take her out. I want them to learn practical living, and the quality of food that I'm going to get is going to be much more superior than what most people are going to get.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's a huge part of it. And it's also, I'm a conservationist. A preservationist would be someone that wants to never allow hunting. Just preserve what we have. Don't do anything to hurt anything. Well, conservationist, I actually want to keep a balance in nature. So people are going to go hunting deer. I'm going to go out hunting bear too, because I know if I don't hunt bear, that population is going to explode and cause problems. So we've killed a couple bears this year, my boys and I, and we eat the bear meat. It's great. It's really, really good. And we use the fat for baking and for cooking. And we tan the hides and throw them on the kids' beds. And so we do these things. Do we need the blanket and the clothing? No. Can we go buy meat from the store? Yeah. But I'm also supporting our environment as well by making sure because if the bear population gets too big, eventually it'll cull itself through sicknesses or diseases, right? So I'm helping prevent some of that.
That makes sense. Yep. As we kind of wrap up here, I always like to ask, what's your best piece of advice you would give to anyone watching?
That's a great question. For dads, get out with your sons. I cannot stress that enough. Don't do things by yourself, no matter what it is. Whether it's changing a tire in your car, do it with your boys. Have them. It might take you 10 times as long. I don't care. Do it anyways. Because that relationship that you build with your sons and that you're cultivating in them is invaluable. That needs to be done. And same with your daughters. Daughters need to have dads that know. They need to know that their dad is going to protect them and love them, that their brothers are going to protect and love them. And then dads need to show that with how they treat their wife and how they love and adore their wife. And if dads do that well, kids will be better, families will be better. I mean, all of that culminates into a better home.
Absolutely. Where can people find you and your show and everything online?
So I have an Instagram. I'm not on there very much, but it's Field to Flame. And Field to Flame is a show I've been working on with my boys. And we haven't launched anything official. We have a trailer, but the first episode's not it's done, but it's not out yet. And then I'm on Facebook as well.
Fantastic. I'll put links in the description. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. See you guys.